another video in my whole damn collection series. I know it's been a little bit since I've done one of these, but I've been laid up with several different things. Recently gotten over an illness, but I wanted to get back to this series and continue on with everything that I have in my collection, my DVD and Blu-ray collection, under the letter C. So today we'll be doing C. First up in the letter C, I have Jim Carrey's The Cable Guy, directed by Ben Stiller. You know, when this first came out, I guess a lot of people really didn't like this movie that much, and it was sort of a different role for Jim Carrey. A lot of people thought that he was playing a little too creepy, a little too on the dark side. For me, even at that time, even though I was very young, I was very appreciative of this turn of a role for Jim Carrey, and it would definitely sort of lead later on to his more dramatic, serious stuff, even though this is still very much kind of a slapsticky, ridiculous comedy. But it was kind of a different kind of character, him playing an unsympathetic, sort of unlikable character. And I think it's still a pretty interesting movie. I think very underrated in the Jim Carrey catalog. Let me know what you think. Here I have a foreign film directed by the recent Palme d'Or winner at the Cannes Film Festival, Michael Haneke's Cachet. This is a French film that he directed. He's directed in several languages, but this one's in French. Stars Juliette Binoche, and basically it's about it's a thriller about a couple who's receiving strange videotapes to their house of their house from the front yard's perspective, and upon investigating this, the man of the home realizes it has a bunch of strange ties to his past, and it's kind of a taut, somewhat disturbing psychological thriller, and it's really, really good, and I'd say one of Haneke's best. Here on Blu-ray, I have the Captain America Blu-ray that just came out last year. Actually, I think the Blu-ray was probably released. Was it released last year? Yeah, it's probably released right around, just around Christmas or something like that. But you know, not much to say here. The Avengers just came out. The Avengers is quite a bit better than this. And I haven't actually watched this again since I bought it, so I don't know what that really says about how much I liked it, but I remember liking it quite a bit in theater, so I don't know, maybe I'll pop it in one day and give it a shot. I'd like to know how it looks on Blu-ray anyway. One of my all-time favorite horror movies, also one of my all-time favorite movies, period. This is Carrie, directed by Brian De Palma in the 70s. Apparently they're remaking this with Chloe Moretz. I think that's a mistake. Martin Scorsese's Casino. Recently rebought this in Blu-ray. Didn't put it in a video because I didn't think it was terribly necessary, because I knew I was going to be doing this soon. Not as good as Goodfellas. I think a lot of people kind of bagged on this when it first came out, but like a lot of Scorsese's work, with some time and distance behind it, you can still kind of see how good it really is. Yeah, there's a lot about this movie I really like. I really like Sharon Stone's performance in here in particular, and I'm not even particularly a Sharon Stone fan, but she's very good in this. Steven Spielberg's Catch Me If You Can. Again, I think a really underrated work for him. Not that nobody really likes this movie. A lot of people like this movie. But that it's just, I think, oftentimes forgot in his catalog because it's not as showy as some of his other work. But this is a really, really good screenplay, a really, really good cast, and kind of just an exciting, fun sort of movie. I don't really know how to describe it other than that, but it's really good, and it's really fun to see this sort of time period in the late 60s, early 70s, so yeah. Okay, kind of a newer movie, a comedy, Cedar Rapids, which I have on Blu-ray. This is starring Ed Helms. It's directed by Miguel Arteta, and it's kind of funny. It came out, it's a sort of an indie comedy that came out, I don't know, a year or so after The Hangover. And a lot of people compared it to it, I think just mostly because of the Ed Helms connection, and also because it's sort of about a group of guys, you know, kind of getting away from home and getting into trouble, but in a much more somewhat honest and subtle way. This is The Changeling, starring George C. Scott. This is not The Changeling that has anything to do with Angelina Jolie. This is a ghost movie, and kind of a smart one. Very, very subtle, not a lot of special effects, and has a lot more to do with sort of creeping atmosphere. But it's really good and really clever adult kind of horror movie. Charlie Bartlett, starring the now famous Anton Yelchin. I believe this is really his breakout role, and one of the first roles that Robert Downey Jr. Kind of came back in when he sort of announced to the world that he was ready to do some acting again. Really good movie. This was produced by MTV Films, and even though I have not much to say about the channel anymore, I think that MTV Films is one of the better distributors of independent film as of lately, with the exception of some of their own produced stuff like the Jackass movies or whatever. But this is a really fun movie, and it's basically about this kid here who's sort of an outsider in his school, and he becomes sort of both a drug dealer, dealing over-the-counter or under-the-counter medicine, and also becoming something of a role model and shrink to all of the troubled teens in his school. And it's been a little while since I've seen this movie, so I'd almost be curious to see it again, but I do really like it a lot. This is Children of Men, directed by Alfonso Cuarón, who a lot of people might know more from being the third director of the Harry Potter series. But this is a science fiction action film that he made quite a bit, a few years after he did Harry Potter, and of course completely different. It's sort of a dark dystopian vision of the future where nobody is giving birth anymore. And they find one person who is pregnant and have to try and protect her. It's very interesting, very, very well shot, very well directed. Honestly, one of the best movies of the last 10-15 years, and worth a look if you're into dark kind of social science fiction. Recently bought this on Blu-ray, one of my favorite all-time films, and this is Roman Polanski's Chinatown, starring Jack Nicholson and Faye Dunaway. This was made back in 1974, and kind of one of the first sort of neo-noirs, looking back at sort of the film noir era of the 40s and the 30s, and kind of updating it for a modern audience, especially with having Jack Nicholson in the lead. One of his best performances, playing a private detective who's on the search for a case that has to do with the water supply of Los Angeles being drained. And it goes some really interesting dark places that you don't expect it to go, and it's kind of just a great 70s film. Just showed this recently in one of my updates, so I won't talk a lot about it, but this is Chronicle on Blu-ray. Still one of my favorite movies of 2012. Interesting sort of take on the superhero thing. There's another film directed by Miguel Arteta, who also did Cedar Rapids. This, I believe, was his first film. It's written by Mike White. It's called Chuck and Buck. It's an independent film, also starring Mike White in the lead, and Paul Weitz, who I believe is the director of quite a few of those. Him and his brother did the American Pie series together, and I forget which one does which, but he's either the guy who did New Moon and Cirque du Freak, or he's the guy who did About a Boy. So you can look it up on IMDb because I don't have it in front of me right now, but yeah, so we have two filmmakers starring in the leads of a very uncomfortable, I would say, sort of indie dramedy, and it's basically about a man played by Mike White who's sexually confused as well as slightly mentally and emotionally stunted into his teen years. He's unsuccessful. His friend, who he grew up with, is successful and engaged and lives in Hollywood, so he decides he's going to take a road trip and see his friend and sort of re-enter his life, and things get weird. But it's really, really good movie. Very, very, very good. And creepy, intense performances all the way around, especially from Mike White in the lead here. He really should have been Oscar nominated, I think, for both the screenplay and for his performance. But yeah, this is a very good movie if you've never seen it. Alright, on Blu-ray, again, I think I've showed this in a recent update, so I won't talk too much about it, but I have The Cinderella Man, directed by Ron Howard, starring Russell Crowe and Renee Zellweger, about boxing during the Depression, and I actually like it better than A Beautiful Mind. In every film geek's collection, they should have a copy of Citizen Kane, and I do too. There's nothing I can say about this movie that nobody else has before, other than to say it's a great movie. It's a cinematic masterpiece. A lot of people kind of say that, and it sounds sort of cliche now, but when you really watch the movie and think about the time that it came out and look at all the other movies that came out and in the same time, it really just was overwhelmingly good as far as the craft behind it, especially from a first-time filmmaker who wrote, directed, produced, and starred in it. Very young. I think he was still in his 20s, early 30s when he made Citizen Kane, or Orson Welles, that is. And it's every single shot in here is doing something interesting, or is an effects shot of some sort, or is doing something interesting with lenses or angles or lighting. This is a film lover's film. Hey, now, as you may have seen in my collections, B's, I have a somewhat of a small collection of blaxploitation movies. Whenever I see them pop up for super cheap, I always snag them up just because I don't really know why, other than I find it amusing that they're even available. Seeing as they're such artifacts from a certain time. But I have Cleopatra Jones, which I haven't watched yet. Not a lot of these I have watched, but I'm going to. And yeah, there you go. Cleopatra Jones, blaxploitation, 70s. Clerks X box set, which is the film Clerks, and X stands for the 10-year anniversary release of the film. Comes with 3 discs, I think. More special features than you have time to know what to do with. A lot of great stuff here. I think if you're going out to buy Clerks, this should be the collection that you get. However, I would like to upgrade to the Blu-ray, not necessarily because it's going to look a lot better, because the movie was shot for, you know, under $10,000, you know, something like $20,000 or less. But it would fit on my shelf a lot easier since this is so big and bulky. But if it doesn't have all the special features, I'm not going to do that, because I love all the stuff that's on here. Very inspiring. If you ever have any plans on making a movie or want to know how to finance a movie, just watching his story here as in the making of documentary, it's very inspiring. Even though I have sort of mixed feelings on Kevin Smith as a filmmaker in general. Clerks 2, which came out quite a bit after the first Clerks. I think this was released in 2005, 2006, and this is good 10, 11 years after the first one, and it kind of shows. There's some stuff in here I really like. I think the characters of Dante and Randall are still very, very funny. I think the dialogue is some of the sharpest in Smith's writing since the first few movies in his career. And in a way, he gets so much right that I can't complain. Of course, I do think it does feel kind of a little tired in comparison, and there's some... The third act kind of runs off the rails, but I really do like this movie quite a bit. And I think it's, for late period Smith, one of his best, and I'd say worth owning if you like his style of humor. Just recently upgraded this to the Blu-ray, and this is Close Encounters of the Third Kind. For some reason, very cheap to find on Blu-ray right now. Even this big, hefty set that comes with a poster, as well as a couple discs and a few different cuts of the movie. This is a really terrific set for a movie that's, I think, one of the best science fiction films ever made and one of Spielberg's best movies. But for some reason, you can always find this on Blu-ray relatively cheap, under $20 usually, and I would say definitely do it if you haven't yet. Great science fiction alien movie. Speaking of, we have Cloverfield, which is another movie I think generally the reactions to Cloverfield is more positive than negative, but there are a few intensely negative views on this movie that are out there, mostly because of the use of the first-person handycam style that this movie somewhat popularized. I think, you know, obviously Blair Witch and a few other things before it sort of introduced that style, but Cloverfield was really one of the first to use it in a blockbuster way, and I think it works. I think it works really, really well, and I think it's a better Godzilla movie than either the Roland Emmerich update and the that Godzilla 2000 thing that Japan released as well. Of course, this isn't actually Godzilla, but a creature that's a lot like it. And it's just a great sort of post 9/11 science fiction horror film that sort of really plays around with the conventions of disaster and terrorism and invasion in a subtly subversive way. Anyone who knows me well knows this is one of my favorite movies of all time, and they don't tease me for it, surprisingly, and that is Clueless, directed by Amy Heckerling in the mid-90s, 1995, starring Alicia Silverstone, as well as a huge cast of many up-and-coming stars, such as Paul Rudd, Breckin Meyer, and Brittany Murphy as well. And this is just a hilarious film. I call this movie, this is my comfort food. I can throw this on whenever and just turn my brain off and enjoy it, even though it is a very smart comedy, and I think that it's not looked at enough for how smart it really is. The dialogue is so good in this, and there's so many jokes that just fly by and you don't even realize it until you've seen it 20 times. Yeah, one of my favorite movies of all time, and one of my favorite movies of the 90s. Alright, more blaxploitation. I have the double disc set of Coffee and Friday Foster. Bought this at a pawn shop for like $2. I have watched both of these, and they're both a lot of fun, both starring Pam Grier. Obviously Coffee, directed by Jack Hill, is quite a bit better than Friday Foster. Friday Foster is kind of a low-scale sort of Coffee ripoff. And it's not as interesting, it's not as well directed, but they're both a lot of fun, and especially if you dig sort of the blaxploitation era. And Pam Grier was a hottie. I just recently rewatched this after I upgraded to the Blu-ray, and that is Michael Mann's Collateral. A really good movie, I think, and I think one of Michael Mann's best movies, even though it's kind of more of a studio film for him. I wouldn't call it, you know, it's not necessarily an auteur work like something like Heat or Manhunter, but I think this is just such a well-made Hollywood movie. I mean, this is like what I think the bar should be set at for the Hollywood thriller. It's just really smart, really well-paced, kind of a slow burn and sort of dark, and I think if you were a big fan of Drive that came out last year in 2011, I think a lot of the look of that movie, not necessarily the tone and atmosphere, but the look of that movie and the way he shoots the city reminded me a lot of especially Collateral, and they both take place in LA and are mostly shot inside of a car for the most part. But yeah, one of Tom Cruise's and Jamie Foxx's best performances in my mind, and I think it's just a terrific thriller. And here we have George Clooney's directorial debut, Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, starring George Clooney as well. The main actor in this, of course, is Sam Rockwell, and he plays Chuck Barris, the TV show producer who created The Dating Game and The Gong Show back in the 70s. And the movie sort of presupposes, I guess this was based on a book that may or may not be fictional, but it presupposes that Chuck Barris was actually a member of the CIA, and when he would take the winners of his dates on The Dating Game as a chaperone, that he was doing so because he had to make a hit in a foreign city. Which sounds like kind of a ridiculous idea, and it sort of is, but the movie it was written by Charlie Kaufman of Being John Malkovich and Adaptation fame, and it's not nearly as surreal or as psychedelic as those movies, but it does kind of play around with the ideas of what you expect in reality and those kind of things in a similar way, and I think this is a really, really good movie, and it's kind of criminally underlooked in my mind, especially for Sam Rockwell's performance, who I think is just always great. Really good actor. Alright, here is the 2-disc Blu-ray edition of Coraline, directed by Henry Selick, who, I've said it 1,000 times before, but I'll say it again. I think Henry Selick is doing what Tim Burton used to do before Tim Burton became a hack. And this is a great movie, really creepy kind of take on the fantasy child sort of Alice in Wonderland thing, but taking it to a much darker sort of horror movie level. Even though it was technically made for kids, done in stop motion animation, much like James and the Giant Peach and Nightmare Before Christmas, both of which Selleck also directed. And the look of it's great. It's I believe it's based on a book written by Neil Gaiman of the Sandman and American Gods fame. So it has a pretty good pedigree, and it's really, really good. Now we're wrapping up. We're getting very, very, very close to the end. And here we have the Count of Monte Cristo film starring Jim Caviezel. I really like this movie a lot. I think, you know, this kind of came out very, very close around the same time as The Mask of Zorro, and had a very similar appeal, and even had somewhat of a similar story in the way that they sort of reimagined the Alexander Duplass book. But I think it's really good, and I really like this. Or did I say Duplass? I meant Dumas. But I really like this movie, and I think that both Jim Caviezel and Guy Pearce give wonderful performances in here, and I really love the look of the movie and the time period, and I think it's a very well-paced, well-intentioned kind of Hollywood period piece, and I think it's actually a lot of fun, and in some ways kind of did what the V for Vendetta movie tried to do, but does it quite a bit better in my mind. So, yeah. Here we have Crazy Stupid Love on Blu-ray. This was released last year, and it was one of my favorite movies of last year. Romantic comedy, sort of in the same vein as something like Love Actually, where you have multiple stories that kind of run in and out of each other, and characters that kind of weave in and out. Stars pretty big cast of, you know, Ryan Gosling, Emma Stone, Julianne Moore, Steve Carell. And everybody in here gives a really good performance, I think, and I think it's very subtly directed. For the most part, again, on the third act, it kind of runs off the rails a little bit. It starts to become less believable as the movie goes, and unfortunately, because of that, I can't call it, you know, a perfect film, but it's pretty damn close, and it's much better than romantic comedies nowadays need to be. And I liked it quite a bit. And I like to see Ryan Gosling kind of playing in type, since he's been playing out of type for so long. But yeah, it's a very entertaining, pretty smart little romantic comedy. This I know I showed in my last thing, so I won't talk about it a lot, but this is The Crow on Blu-ray. One detail I left out of that review, so I could save it here, is the whole controversy about this movie. This was Brandon Lee, son of Bruce Lee's last movie he ever made. He died tragically in a accident involving real bullets versus blanks, and I know that a good quarter or more of the movie had to be shot with a body double after he died to finish the film, and honestly I think it's pretty seamless. I don't really notice as I'm watching it, and I've seen it a million times, where Brandon Lee stops and where the body double enters. I think they did a really good job at cleaning that up. But it's a really good kind of moody, atmospheric, different kind of R-rated superhero film. And lastly, in the letter C, we have Cyrus, directed by the Duplass brothers, not the Dumas brothers. And this is starring, of course, John C. Reilly, Jonah Hill. And it's kind of a funny, sort of dramatic comedy about a boy who still lives with his mother. John C. Reilly's trying to sort of woo her, and he's overprotective, so he starts to act out to keep John C. Reilly away. And it kind of sounds like really sort of a sitcom-y sort of plot, and it kind of is. But they actually do some things with the characters and sort of go into their minds a little bit deeper than you usually get with a premise like that. And I think it's a very kind of heartwarming, fun and funny kind of independent comedy. So there you go. That's everything I have in my whole damn collection under the letter C in Blu-ray and DVD. And if you liked anything here that I talked about, or have anything more to add to what I said about any of these movies, just drop some comments below. If you want to show me something in your collection, maybe review something that I talked about in this video, you can put a video response. They're more than welcome. And I just wanted to say, I think on this channel I have something like 92 subscribers now, so I'm getting dangerously close to the 100th subscriber mark. And when I do hit the 100 mark, maybe I'll do something special like a commission review or something for that 100th subscriber. So look forward to that, and thanks for watching, and thanks for supporting my channel.